Welcome to Delivering U.S. Army Modernization. Please welcome our host, Thomas Spoehr, Director of the Heritage Foundation Center for National Defense.
And I want to welcome you to our event today, Delivering U.S. Army Modernization, featuring Army Chief of Staff General James C. McConville. Well, these are certainly some interesting times. I know we say that a lot, but these seem more interesting than normal. The Army finds itself with no shortage of challenges. Recent budgets have exerted downward pressure on the Army. I wrote a paper recently that said that Army buying power has gone down 10% since fiscal year 2018. COVID and low unemployment rates make recruiting challenging, frankly, and we're seeing that in the papers nowadays. And Tuesday, I guess, summing it all up, Army Secretary Christine Wormuth confirmed that difficult choices lie ahead. Competing with these budget challenges is the reality that the procurement holiday that took place from 2001 to 2020 created an overwhelming need for the Army to be modernized. And although the Biden administration's 2023 budget is delayed at this point, Congress will turn its attention to that budget and the authorization bills, and when they do, they're probably going to have some questions for Army leaders. Well, today we're honored to have Army General James McConville, the 40th Chief of Staff of the Army, to join us to help us understand how the Army is navigating these pressures and what he sees as the major challenges and opportunities ahead. We're going to start off with me asking General McConville a few questions, but then we want to turn to your audience questions. And so you're looking at this through an application, and on that application, you'll find a tab to ask us questions. And if you click on that, and if you write us a question, we will do our very best, ladies and gentlemen, to get to your question. So we have a great program, and let's drive on because I want to get to as many questions as we can. By means of brief introduction, General McConville assumed duties as the 40th Chief of Staff of the Army on August 9th, 2019, after serving as the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. Been in this position, I guess now, 2.5 years?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so he's a proud native of Quincy, Massachusetts, and I have to tell you, I was looking on the internet and I saw where Quincy has named a street after you.
They did. Very, very proud.
Yeah, that is.
And along with General Joe Dunford.
Yeah, that is super cool. Yeah, that is neat. So General McConville attended the United States Military Academy at West Point and also holds a Master of Science degree in Aerospace Engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Among General McConville's notable assignments, and there are a number of them, he commanded the storied 101st Airborne Division in Afghanistan in combat. I also saw, that you can correct me here, that you have commanded a division longer than anybody, or?
Very blessed. I mean, certainly the 101st Airborne Division, the longest serving division commander.
In that history of that division.
Others have said the longest division command. I can't really
fair enough.
Verify that. But on the 101st, that is correct statement.
Yeah, that is super cool.
And it'll stay that way until I leave as Chief of Staff of the Army. So everyone that goes in there, I say, you will not be there as long as I am. So that's
2 years, 11 months, but you got to go.
That's exactly right, yes.
And then also commanded the 4th Brigade, 1st Cavalry Division during Operation Iraqi Freedom. So, General McConville, thanks for being here, sir. Really appreciate it. Let me hit you with an opening question, if I can, to get things going here. So, soon as we talked about, the administration is going to deliver the 2023 budget request to Congress, and you and Secretary Wormuth will be asked to come testify about it. Tuesday, Secretary Wormuth, over at another competitor think tank, stated that the Army is going to have to make tough choices, 2023 to 2027, and, quote, everything is on the table. So, hoping for a preview, what will you tell Congress about the Army today? What do you see as your biggest challenges, and what are the opportunities?
Yeah, well, I start off with what I would tell them about the Army is I'm just incredibly proud of our soldiers, our civilians, our families. I mean, what they have done really over this last year, over the last couple of years, to me is absolutely amazing. We're fighting through a pandemic. Contributions around the United States when it comes to supporting hospitals and all types of in the states and the community has just been huge. But when you take a look at what's been going on around the world too, our soldiers are providing security around the world. They're doing incredible type operations, and so I just could not be more proud of what they're doing. And when we talk to Congress, is our job, and the Secretary has talked about a sustainable strategic path. And our job is to provide the best Army we can provide with the resources we get. And we realize that we have to take care of our people, and we're doing that with the resources we get. We have to be ready, and you're seeing readiness as our units go off on short notice around the world to reassure allies and partners, and that's happening as we speak, and also holding those accountable that hold us at risk and taking care of some of those problem sets. And we have to modernize the Army. We have to. We talk about over the last 20 years, and we were focused on counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, and we developed an Army to do that. But as we look to the future, we certainly have pacing competitors we need to be concerned about, and we have to transform the Army. I argue that the Army that we have today was basically built about 40 years ago when I first came in the Army by some great leaders, and we incrementally improved those type systems, and we need to do the same thing right now, and that's what we intend to do.
What happens if we're not able to pull this off, if this modernization that you say is incredibly important doesn't take place?
Well, I think it's going to take place.
Yeah.
And I think it has to take place. And and the Secretary and I are committed to modernizing the Army. That's why she has said everything is on the table. We're taking a hard look at everything. And we'd like to have a big stick, but if we can't have a big stick, we better have a sharp stick.
Right.
And that's what we're looking at.
Cool. Let me ask you, so Army Futures Command, it's almost the same time as you took over the starting of Army Futures Command, isn't it?
It is. It was General Milley
Yeah.
and Secretary Esper,
Right.
kind of put it in place, and then Secretary McCarthy and myself have been carrying on and bringing it to fruition.
What kind of grade would you give to Army Futures
Well,
Command?
I'm very pleased with what
Yeah.
Army Futures Command is doing. If you take a look at, we've talked often about our 31+4 programs and that we're developing right now, and when you look at the speed that they're getting after this,
Yeah.
and I take a look at it, and I've talked about 24 out of these 35 systems going to be in place by 2023. Now, are they going to be full units equipped? No, but we're talking, to me, success for those involved in the modernization effort it's in soldiers' hands. Soldiers have it, they're working it. A lot of these systems are going to be what I call the alpha model. They're not going to be perfect, but if you take a look at even our big five, if you go back and look at the Abrams, the Bradley, the Apache, the Black Hawk, and Patriots, when they first came in the system, there were, if you go back and read, they weren't the world-class systems that they are today. So we need to get these systems in the hands of soldiers. We need to rapidly develop them as we do it, and that's what we're seeing happening around the Army. And the fact we have Futures Command, one of the things I've learned in the Army and and really in the military, you have to have someone focused on the future if you want to get it done. And they're doing it, and they're doing it in close coordination with our acquisition executives. They're doing it in close coordination with our technology leaders. They're doing it with industry. And the other thing is, which I'm really happy with, is we're having our best soldiers, our best NCOs, committed to doing this. And so we're getting great feedback and developing these systems that I would say at the speed of relevance.
Very nice. So I'll hit on maybe a sensitive topic. I remember at the start, maybe even a few times since, there was tension between the acquisition secretary in the Army, the assistant secretary of the Army for acquisition, and Army Futures Command. Can you talk about where that's at today?
Well, I think everyone shares the same vision.
Yeah.
There's always a certain amount of checks and balances that go on in each system. Our system is designed that way. We have civilian control of the military and absolutely need that. But everyone is trying to do the right thing. What I've found works the best is when everyone shares the same vision, the same objectives, and when we talk about what winning looks like, and we want to define, it's not the process. What winning looks like, if you're in the acquisition arena, is what did we deliver to our soldiers that can protect them on the battlefield and give them the edge they need, and that's what we're trying to get everyone committed to.
General Mike Murray, who we both knew, left, I want to say first part of December. How's it looking for a new commander of Army Futures Command?
Well, we have, we certainly have options in moving forward on that, and there's a process a very rigorous process that nominations go through, and we're hoping that comes to fruition pretty soon.
Okay, good. The Army established 6 modernization priorities in 2019, and to your credit, you have not wavered off those priorities. You have not created like a 6.5 or a 7 or anything like that. Do you, as you go forward, do you see the need to modify those modernization priorities?
I don't, and you know, and again, the secretary's taking a look at it, and she's which is really good to have, you know, someone coming in, you know, and taking a look at those priorities. I think what we're going to, you know, take a hard look at is, you know, each program that's under the 31+4. How are they doing? You know, and as I talk to industry, you know, we have to make tough decisions, but tough decisions become a lot easier when you have a program that's not on performance, that's not on schedule, that's not on cost. So that's a, you know, call to action. We need these systems. You know, we're continuing to take a look at them. Some of these systems are changing as we get soldiers on it. So what started as a certain system is changing along the way. But, you know, we're not steadfastness, but the other thing I've also, if you worked in this environment, is you want to stick to priorities, and you want to stay with it so industry can invest, and industry has invested, and you know, and I believe that we still have a requirement for these systems, and we need to get the resources to field them.
Okay, 31+4 means 31 programs managed under the cross-functional teams +4 managed elsewhere. Is it possible we could be at 28+2, or, you know, or is that number, anything special about that number?
No, it's not, and I think it could be. You know, anything is possible. You know, because we come back to, you know, the notion of, you know, what's the best Army we can deliver with the resources we get, you know? And every secretary and every chief is really going across priorities. You know, we talk about, and we haven't, you know, the secretary and I have, she's put out her 6 objectives, which I think are really important. They're going to drive us through. But when we come back to, you know, it's about people, it's about readiness, it's about modernization. And what we have to do is take those resources that are going to be constrained no matter how much we get, and have a priority, you know. And so we want to take care of our people, and our people are our soldiers from all 3 components. There are civilians who are extremely important, and there are families. And so, you know, we want to have good quality of life for our people. You know, we always would like, and I've talked about this, to have a bigger Army, but guess what? You know, it's a trade there. And we know, and this is something I'm not willing to compromise, is readiness. If we're going to send sons and daughters into harm's way, they have to be ready, and so we are committed to give them the training today. But when we look at modernization, that's really future readiness. And so, you know, those are the things we're trying to balance. And I think sometimes you can let the future go because you're so focused on the present. And, you know, what we've tried to do, and we're having a command like Futures Command, it gives us a focus on the future. And we owe it, as a secretary and a chief, to provide future leaders options. And we're doing that right now. And, you know, we can work out the numbers, we can work out, you know, how fast, how soon, but, you know, 10 years from now, you know, we don't want to be leaving the secretary and the chief legacy systems. You know, ideally, we've transformed and modernized the Army so they have a lot of options going in the future.
Quick question about the Integrated Visual Augmentation System, or IVAS. I know you guys paused it last year, I guess, and doing some tweaks. Can you talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, you know, to me that is a transformational item when you take a look at it. You know, and I often use the example of the phone. You know, the process we went on. You know, you're old enough to remember the rotary phone. You know, and then people wanted to go to a cordless phone because they wanted to be able to walk around the house, and we went to a cell phone, and all those things. But then, transformationally, people came in with, you know, an iPhone or some type of capability that changed how we communicate. We've been improving our night vision goggle systems over the years. I was flying with full face PVS 5s back in the day. They were kind of clunky, and then we cut the things out, and we've gotten better and better, and now we've got this enhanced night vision goggle Bravo that's very fused, that the troops really like. Well, what IVAS is doing is bringing a lot more capability in. You know, and we've had troops on it, so they're going through the process. This thing has been fielded at an incredible speed. And if you take a look at maybe, you know, the original cell phone, it was a little bigger and maybe a little more clunky than we might have wanted. So we're working through that to make sure that the troops have a functional system that can withstand the rigors of combat. But what we're seeing is the capabilities that's providing, the ability to fuse night vision systems, the ability to give soldiers and leaders the information that they need on the battlefield, the ability to navigate, very, very quickly and know exactly where you are. And then you walk back into the ability in the future to do rehearsals on actually train before you do it, and the ability to train. All those things are coming together. Now, is that going to take some time? Absolutely. And when you look at futures and how fast this is coming into being, we're talking 2 or 3 years.
Right.
Usually when we talk about acquisition in major programs, we're talking 7 years to get a requirement, 7 to 8 years to go through the acquisition process, 15, 20 years. So I think we need to recognize when you go to speed, you're not going to get exactly right.
Especially, I think the closer to a soldier a piece of equipment is, the more precise it has to be. Like helmets, boots, things like that, they have to be exactly right for soldiers to accept them, and IVAS is probably like that.
Yeah, one of the things we've done with IVAS, and General C.D. Donahue was kind of the lead that got this thing going, but as he's gone back to the 82nd, and we've had great soldiers and NCOs on this system. So Rangers, Marines, 82nd, people that are kind of masters of the craft, and they're working very closely with the company that's doing it to get it better. So they're getting what they want, they're getting the input, and the engineers are working side by side with soldiers and saying, well, this is why we don't like this, or this is how we do this. And they're out in patrols together, and they're going, we're putting them out in rough conditions. This is what it's like in cold weather. This is what it's like in very, very hot weather. This is, the type of rigors that a soldier would go through, and this works very, very well. And as the technology improves, it'll get lighter, it'll get smaller, it'll get more capable, just like that big old cell phone that we used to have, and now you all have them sitting in your pockets.
Right, yeah. I would remind our audience joining us virtually to please enter your questions at the question tab, and we'll get to those very soon here. Maybe the last question, at least that I'll have on modernization, is on future vertical lift, helicopter programs. You guys are pursuing quickly 2 programs, Future Aerial Reconnaissance, FARA and FLARA, an assault and a reconnaissance.
Yeah, Future Attack Reconnaissance Aircraft and the Future Long Range Assault Aircraft.
Yeah, and the chattering classes here in Washington, D.C. are opining that there's no way the Army can field both of these on the same timeline, that something's going to break. Can you talk about the need for these aircraft?
Well, I think it's transformational. If you go back to the Big Five, and at that time, the secretaries and chiefs had the wherewithal to say, you know what, we're going to have an Apache helicopter, which was an attack helicopter. We're going to have a Black Hawk that's going to do this. And we also had developed a Chinook then too. So we actually developed 3 platforms. And as we take a look at in the future, I would argue those aircraft are the best aircraft in the world for where they're at. But as we take a look at the future, one of the things that we're learning is the importance of speed, the importance of range, and the importance of convergence. And as we see in the future, what we've done with those platforms is we've incrementally improved them over the last 40 years. Right. And they'll be around for a while. They're not going away. But as we think about transformational change in the Army, we want aircraft that can fly much faster. We want aircraft that can go much further. We want aircraft that can deliver soldiers at a greater range. When you start thinking about the golden hour, right now it's defined by basically 100 miles, because you're basically 1 hour a Black Hawk can go so far. Well, imagine if you could go 2 to 3 times that fast. What does that give us for range as far as for our commanders on the ground? If you have to go in and get someone, what does that do for us? When you start to look at systems that can deliver air-launched effects from not 6 or 7 kilometers, but very, very long ranges, you start to change the dynamics. And some have said, well, is there any room for manned aircraft in the future? I'm a believer. I've been working with unmanned aircraft since 1990, and used them to our advantage in 2004, 2005 when we were flying over cities. Manned, unmanned teaming, and have watched at that. And we do a lot of things with drones or unmanned aircraft, and that's certainly something we're very, very concerned about. But to me, there's always going to be a place for a person in the loop. Doesn't necessarily need to be in the lead aircraft. Doesn't necessarily need to be clearing that road in the lead vehicle. But we don't want to, at least in my eyes, walk away from what happens with a person that can actually see the battlefield and maneuver around the battlefield in the way they do it. And we could talk a whole bunch of tactics, but I believe, and these aircraft, are not going to be delivered in 23. What we're doing is setting the conditions for the future of the Army, for future secretaries in chief to have a capability that's transformational. We know right now we can incrementally improve what we have, but you're going to get to a point where the incremental improvements are not transformational. And that's what we're trying to do for the Army. So I see, when people say you can't afford it, I say, well, I think we need it. I look at someone that had my job, General Marshall, and I was reading an old piece that he wrote, and he said something to the effect of, right before World War II, he goes, when I had the time, I didn't have the money. And when I got the money, I didn't have the time. And what we're trying to do is hedge on that. We're trying to find that hedge point where, in 2028, 2029, the chief and secretary can make a decision. You know what? I'm going to take a look at these endurance systems we have, and we're going to start procuring transformational systems, because we probably would have had to recap these older systems anyways, which we do. And now we've given an opportunity to do something very, very different. Same thing, some people going, why do you need to replace the Bradley, next generation combat vehicle? Right. I mean, take a look at, the technology that we have. We're not using a 40-year-old phone. No one would, a little dial-up type phone. We're not doing that. And so what we're trying to do, the secretary and myself, is take the resources we have. We're doing, you've heard of night court. Night court is on everything. Every person, every dollar matters. And we're really going through, rolling our sleeves up. We did that with our modernization efforts, but we're looking at how we do business completely in the Army. And that comes to trade. Do we need more people? Sure we do. But do you want more people, or do you want to have a modernization program? Do you want to have, this, or do you want people living in barracks? Those are the type of decisions that have to be made.
Yep. Excellent. General, I'd like to shift gears and talk about recruiting for a moment here. And we are starting to see signs in the media that the military is having trouble recruiting the number of people it needs. And I guess that ought not to be a surprise to us when you go to your restaurants and they all say help wanted, and you can read in the paper where there are many more job openings than there are people pursuing them. So I guess we ought not to be astonished that that would extend to the military. But the Air Force a couple weeks ago talked about they are half of where they are in their pool of people that are waiting to enter the Air Force. And then the Army, General Vereen, the commander of Army Recruiting Command, has talked about he's upping bonuses to $50,000, and the Army is offering more and more opportunities for 2-year enlistments, which may be attractive to young people, but it's difficult in the Army because you're now training at a much more frequent rate. Can you talk about the challenges you're seeing in recruiting?
Well, I think everyone right now we're in a war for talent.
Yeah.
We want the best young men and women that come in, and we want to give them an opportunity to those who want to serve, an opportunity to serve. And I look at the Army. What a great place to start. What a great place to maybe even stay. And I look at it as an escalator to success. You come in, I was a working class kid from Quincy, and maybe you can be the chief of staff of the Army. Who knows? Right down the street was General Joe Dunford, a working class kid, and he got to be the chairman and the Commandant of the Marine Corps. But I know so many of our soldiers who have extraordinary stories, who came in the Army, and many that stayed came in for 2 years or came in for 3 years. And what we want to do is give people an opportunity. Take a look at it. I often, write letters to, I got one, the other day, 95 years old, 100 years old. People are very successful, but they're so proud of those years that they served in the service. Yep. And when they look back on their lives, they go, I made maybe made a lot of money. I did this, but maybe besides, my family, one of the most important things I did was serve my country. And we want to give everyone that opportunity. So are we challenged? Yes, we are. And we have, challenges because, quite frankly, who's qualified to come in? The numbers have come down. I was reading something in the 1960s from President John F. Kennedy right before he took the presidency. He was lamenting about only 50% of Americans were qualified to come in the military. We'd take that in a second. we're starting to see where we used to say 29%, and now we're down to maybe 23% of Americans are qualified to come in. And what we see, and this is we have to do a better job of exposing young men and women to the military, because some have said, and it's become a family business. We have a lot of our senior non-commissioned officers and officers have sons and daughters that are serving the military because it's very familiar to them. They know what it looks like, but we want to open up that aperture and give every young man and women an opportunity to serve, and we're doing that. Our retention rates are very good. Yeah. In fact, and that's allowed us to really reduce the amount of people we need to bring in the Army. And the other thing we're trying to do is, to me, quality is more important than quantity. It really is. And the 2-year investment, some people said, one of the things we like about that is we also want to spend time for our reserve forces, and because our retention is so good in the active, historically, that's really fed our reserve forces. So we're working our way through that. But, for all those out there, watching, we need all the help we can get to inspire young men and women to come into the Army, and I don't think they'll be sorry they did.
Yeah. So maybe the 2-year enlistment, the big idea behind that is get in, and we know you're going to love it, and so you're not going to do a 2-year enlistment. You'll do a 4 or a 6 or something like that. Is that part of it?
Well, I think it's part, but you're going to go in the reserves too.
Yes.
So you have an opportunity to come in and serve, and then go into the reserves, go home and serve in the reserves. So I think there's value there. But what we're seeing too is, I remember when I came in, I went to West Point, and one of my big kind of challenges was I had a 5-year commitment coming out of West Point. I go, I'll be 27 when I can get out of the Army. When you were young, that just seemed like you were so old, and here I am, 40 some odd years plus. So we don't know, and what I tell young men and women, keep your options open. Yeah. You just don't know what you're going to do. But the great thing about the Army is you can do anything you want in the Army. We have it all, I mean, we certainly have, the best high-speed infantry you can have. You can be in aviation, you can be in artillery, but you can do medical stuff, you can do cyber, you're going to get world-class training, and I think it's just a great place to start, and for some of us, I guess it's going to be a great place to finish.
People are living to like 80-plus years now, so now there's enough time for like 2 or 3 careers, and so the fact that somebody starts in the Army does not mean that they have shut any doors. They have, in fact, opened doors.
No, it is. I mean, the leadership training you get, the discipline you get. I like to tell people we're the world's greatest health club. Where else do you get paid 5 days a week to work out and be fit for the rest of your life? So.
Yeah, cool.
And we're going to invest in you. We're going to invest, in your kids. And again, I signed up all my kids. So I need everyone else to do the same.
General, earlier you talked about the size of the Army, and I know that's a big topic right now, and you're on record. This was your confirmation hearing. You talked about you believe the Army was too small. And until about 2 years ago or a year ago, the Army was modestly growing, a couple of thousand a year, and then last year you had to announce that because of budget pressures, you had to stop the Army from growing. Your aspiration was to get to 500,000 in the active component. Do you still believe the Army is active component and the whole total Army is too small?
I haven't changed my opinion as far as do I think the Army should be bigger? Yes. Absolutely. But it gets back to, my other thing I said is we're going to deliver the best Army we can with the resources we get. And it gets back to this, you want a big stick or you want a sharp stick? I believe in a sharp stick. And I want to make sure that, every person in the United States Army counts. And that's the type of analysis. Every dollar counts in how we spend it. And so, my intent, and I think the Secretary shares is, we want the best Army we can get. We got to make sure they're ready, and we got to make sure that we have a modernization program for the future, so it's balanced. So, as you take a look at end strength, sure, we'd like a bigger Army. Everyone, who wouldn't, But, what's the right number that, we're not, burning out people on deployments, and at the same time we can do all we need to do. But to me, it's really about quality is more important than quantity, especially as we see the future battlefield that we're going to operate on. these, young soldiers, non-commissioned officers and officers are going to be put into very challenging environments. And, I've seen that around the world, and what we find is they're going to have to be able to operate. And in these environments, people that can do their job is a lot more important than having, a whole lot of people. And that's where we're going.
What struck me, we read every day about Ukraine and the Russian forces that are across the border, either in Belarus or in Russia. And they talk about the modern equipment that the Russian Federation has, T-72 tanks with the latest thermal sights, Iskander-M missiles with ranges of 500 kilometers, something like that. This is not the Russian army that we grew up making fun of when we were coming up in the Army, and I think there's something to be learned, I think, for us in that, and that they've invested in their modernization programs. I don't know if you have a comment on that. Or...
No, I think, we should, be concerned about, all our competitors.
Yeah.
And, we're certainly concerned about what's going on around Ukraine right now. And so from a military standpoint, we want to be the most powerful army we can, because that's how you deter, other countries from taking actions. There's a cost associated with behaviors if you're going to attack another sovereign country or something along those lines. So I think it's really important as one of the whole of government efforts that we have a strong military. The peace through strength. That President Reagan talked about when I came in the military. At my, in fact, he spoke at my college graduation and actually gave that speech. But it's a whole of government effort, and it really is. And part of our job, at least my job, is to make sure we have the strongest army we can have. So that's in the the kit bag, or it's in the quiver of those who are doing diplomacy. We're here to support diplomacy and support policy, and we want to make sure we have the strongest military to be able to do that.
Last year, as a member of the Joint Chiefs, you submitted a unfunded requirements list to Congress in accordance with the law, and it struck me as I was looking at that list how many of those things seemed like critical things. They weren't nice to have, they were kind of need to have kind of things. Barracks, child care centers, joint lightweight tactical vehicle, things like that. It was kind of a measure for me to how much pressure the Army was on, that these things had to be on an unfunded list versus a funded list. Can you just talk about the pressures you're feeling in that regard?
Well, I keep coming back to that point, but because people ask me about people always want to ask me, well, is the budget sufficient?
Right.
And what I tell people is, we're going to get a budget, and we're going to give you the best Army that we can with that budget. But here are the things that we're not going to be able to afford.
Yeah.
And if you saw the the unfunded requirements list, it runs a gamut. Some people will come up with a very small one, but we had to make trades, in the people business, so we can't, if people will come to us and say, hey, your barracks aren't good enough, or your housing's not good enough, or your child development centers. Now, we have a long-term plan, or your industrial base is not modernized, or you're not doing enough of these, you're not doing enough of those, or you haven't bought enough of these, and they're all valid points. And and my point is, and as you said, by statutory requirements, I have to come back and say, okay, here's what's not getting done. You've got a budget. You can see, you certainly have the capability within our budget. That's why we have oversight to move things around. But these are the things that we would have liked to get done if we could. And that's what, that's how the system works. And we lay that out.
Okay. I know I was talking to your staff. You've got a busy travel schedule both ahead of you and behind you, and you and the Sergeant Major of the Army get out about and talk to soldiers and family members. I know people would be curious about when you ask them, hey, what's on your mind or what's worrying you, what do they tell you?
I think, when I talk to soldiers and families, I think one of the biggest things, one of the things we talk about is people first.
Yeah.
And people is not just soldiers. It is soldiers, but it's also their families, and I think a lot of people just want to make sure that they're getting the quality of life services. They're getting quality housing, and they're getting quality child development centers. I think we're seeing a maybe different type of person that operates in the Army. We have a lot of dual military, and we have a lot of dual professionals. So child development centers are extremely important. if we're going to compete for families. And, if you think about it, I keep coming back, we're in a war for talent. We have incredible, women that serve in the Army, and we want to make sure that they can have the family that they want to have, and so that's going to change how we do business. Child development centers, I think it's 89% of our sergeants and above have a family. So if we want to keep them, we have to take care of their family. That's our leadership, and I think that's really important. So, part of people first, the way that plays out in the budget is we are putting money into housing. We are putting money into billets. We are building child development centers. Spousal employment is something we're really working hard on because we want to take care of families. We're even going after the moves, and how are PCS moves. All these type things that influence, someone's, thought about, do we stay in the Army or not stay in the Army? We want to take care of people.
Excellent, thank you. Dakota, how are we looking for questions from the audience? Do we have some?
We've got 40.
Oh, let's go. We'll go now to the audience. And again, just because we have 40 doesn't mean we're not going to get to your question. But so go ahead.
Yeah. So the buckets really have to do with all the things you've addressed. It's budget, acquisition programs, the things that you want to get. Do you have the money to do that? The second bucket really has to do with talent management and people, which you have been addressing. One of the comments on that is we've got too many generals, but I'll leave that on the side. The third bucket then really is big war. So, the Army, like the other services, has dealt with 20 years of fighting against our regular forces. Now you're looking at Russia and Ukraine. How does the People's Liberation Army shape up? And so if we start with that one, I think first, or grab a lot of these questions, and how is the Army accounting for this shift to big war where you don't have maybe assured air power or comms, or your logistics supply lines are being interdicted, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think, and that's where I at least try to make the argument about the need to transform the Army, and the reason why we need to do it right now is, I agree with the person who asked the question, is, over the last 20 years, since 9/11, we have grown up in an environment of really what I would say counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, irregular warfare. And those are the type of systems that we purchase. If you think about some of the big purchases, a lot of stuff associated with counter IED, our MRAP vehicles, our JLTV, those type things that we needed, our drones that were designed for a environment where you really don't have an active air defense. And so if you take a look at our 6 modernization priorities, number 1 is long-range precision fires. And so we have to not only, use those when you think about large-scale ground combat operations. I mean, the things that deter people in large-scale ground combat operations are certainly it's fires, it's mechanized forces, it's tanks, it's Bradleys, it's attack helicopters, all those type things that we see moving around Ukraine and other places. We need to modernize the force to do that. So that's what we're trying to get after, large-scale, and set the Army not only for today, but how do we set the Army for the future? And the big concept that we're seeing, and I've talked a little about this, is how do you get speed, range, and convergence? And what I mean by that is, we may have, we're developing hypersonic missiles. So guess what? They're going to have, high speed. They're going to have long range. But how do you get the convergence of other systems that are actually going to help us with targeting and an integrated battle command system where you can quickly get to the decision? I used to use an example when I was commanding the 101st Airborne Division. We had a lot of helicopters. And the helicopters, basically, just for simple math, fly about 100 miles an hour. And I would argue if we took 10 hours to go through our planning process to get those helicopters, into the fight for the ground maneuver commander, we're only moving at 10 miles an hour. Think about that. That was the speed of decision making. And I go, if we're moving at 10 miles an hour, we might as well take a truck. Save your money. Don't buy a $30 million helicopter. Buy a $250,000 thing. It's the same thing when you start thinking about how quickly can we get effects on an enemy matter. And one of the things, we just went through a big program called Project Convergence. And we did it with the Joint Force, and we brought a bunch of sensors together, coming through an integrated battle command system that passes it to, joint fires. And we're able to move things into the minutes, you know, and even some cases to seconds, vice hours, or even some cases days. That is the future, and that's why we believe, you know, the modernization priorities, the 31+4, and brought together by Project Convergence as part of the joint force is so critical for the future of not only the Army, the military, and our joint partners.
All these issues are so related, right? So it goes right into that second bucket of, you know, budget and acquisition programs, what you all have already been discussing. So when you think about, you know, program objective memoranda authorities that are either given or withdrawn, you know, where Army Futures Command comes from, unfunded priority lists. I mean, a number of questions really had to do about that. And
they're all tied together.
They're all tied together.
And the other thing that I don't think we should forget is talent management. One of the big things that we're doing in the Army is we're moving from an industrial age personnel management system to a 21st century talent management system. And so people, what do you mean by that? You know, well, first of all, one of the big things we're doing is bringing the total force onto one personnel system, which seems, you know, like a simple thing. It's a very long task, but, you know, we have great soldiers in our Guard and Reserve, but they're all in different personnel systems, and we're actually bringing them together on an integrated personnel and pay system. So what that allows you to do is basically see your 1 million soldiers on one system. The other thing we're doing is we're defining people, once we get this system firmly in place, by more than 2 variables. You know, the way we tend to define people is, you know, you're a sergeant of infantry, or you're a specialist of, you know, medic and those type things. You know, one of the most interesting things, and this is by way of example, is part of Futures Command, we stood up a software factory because we realized that, you know, and the Secretary talks about data fabric and as number 2, data-centric Army. The future is data, the ability to move data very, very quickly. You can't do convergence. You can't bring all these systems together, the joint systems and senses, without being able to move data very, very quickly. So we have to be able to, if you're going to use artificial intelligence, you got to be able to write code on the battlefield. So we set up a software factory, and we put out a call, who wants to be in the software factory? And I went down there and I met three soldiers. One was a medic, the other one was a baker, a cook, and the other one was an automotive mechanic. And they code at the PhD level. And I really found that interesting, you know, and they're willing to come in and you know, because we have 2 PhD computer scientists that have all the right degrees, and they say these soldiers code at the same level. This is where talent management, we got a ton of talent in the Army. We just got to be able to see it. And, you know, especially in our Guard and Reserve, where sometimes their level of grade and military occupational specialists mask what they really can bring to the Army. So we're gathering it. Talent management for the future of the Army is probably the most important thing we're going to do, and leadership, getting the right leaders in the right place is really important. I just want to talk, if I could just say a second, we put in to the Army an assessment program. We have a battalion command assessment program, a colonel's command assessment program. It's a lot like a professional football combine where you actually try out and go through a process. And we're learning a whole bunch about, you know, leaders and getting the right leaders in the right place. And we think this is extremely important, probably one of the most important things we're going to do for the future.
I think you're looking at my notes from all the questions that have come in, because it bleeds right into that, right? The talent management piece. One person commented about the exodus of captains. Another person has commented about how do you retain your junior enlisted ranks. It's better to retain instead of having to recruit and bring in, and you lost all those years of things. And then there are these very socially prevalent issues like, you know, diversity and inclusion, et cetera. And people will at times criticize that does this lead to a loss of standards, right? You know, those sorts of things. So just the nature of some of the people.
Let me talk about the captains, because we are in a war, and here's what we're trying to do with captains. And I am a recovering G1. I used to be the director of personnel. I didn't know anything about personnel, but I got to learn it through the eyes of a former commander that was taking a look at it. And, you know, one of the things, and I read all the books about talent management with bleeding talent and all those type things, and some of the things are really correct. Others are not so. Like one of the headlines was, hey, 50% of the captains are getting out. You hear that, you go, oh my God. we're bleeding talent. Well, here's the deal, the real deal, when you know the numbers. 50% of the captains have to get out because, you know, it's called physics. You have 3,600 captains in a year group, and by law, you can have 1,800 majors. So that's kind of the physics. But here's the deal. You can't stop there because that's what people, at least where I was, what I want to do is keep 80%, stay with me, 80% of the top 50% of the I want to keep the best captains in the Army that have the skills that we want to keep. And we got to compete for them. And we got to start early. And we want to make sure that those captains represent the diversity of the type of people we want. So rather than treating everyone as an interchangeable part, you know, I argue, you know, just like when you go, you know, professional football play, when a person comes, if you're a Heisman Trophy winner, when you go into the combine for, you know, you're a little different than a D3, you know, person coming in. So we want to identify, you know, those with the most potential early on and compete for their talents. Don't come back to me and say, hey, you don't need any more captains because you got 50%. What I want to do, why is this person leaving? What's it going to take to compete for their talents to keep them in the Army? How do we get them in the right place? You know, you don't always get your preference in the Army, but if we can give people their preferences based on their knowledge, skills, and behavior, how do we do that?
I think we have reached the end of our time, General. I'll give you a moment if you want to make any closing comments.
No, I appreciate the questions. I appreciate all the support. Just a special thanks to all of our soldiers in the regular Army, National Guard and Reserve specifically. What they're doing for the nation is unbelievable. And to the families who enable our soldiers to serve, thank you so much. And then for the soldiers for life that are out there, our retirees and veterans, I give you 2 missions. First of all, not 3 because you're retired or you're a veteran, but I need your help to help inspire other young men and women to serve. And I also want you to hire our vets when you're out there. So inspire and hire, and thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. And you know, you remind me, we've got soldiers, I don't know about in harm's way, but moving to places that are dangerous. And so our thoughts and prayers are with them. And thank you, General McConville, for your service, for the service of your family, and for the service of our great Army. This has been a wonderful session, ladies and gentlemen. You're going to get a survey probably from our events team, and I ask you to fill that out so that we can continue to improve our events. We will have the video for this event probably posted within a day or so, maybe 2 at the most. And so I encourage you to share that video, and thanks for everything you do out there as well. And General McConville, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for the questions.